that time we can hopefully physically connect, if you're able and willing, beginning next week. So I announced last week that I was going to do 2 more classes on the parables, and they would end next week. But after consulting with some of the education leaders, trying to coordinate that this will be the last live class, no matter what. Next week, all the classes, if any, will be pre-recorded, and so you could watch them almost at any time we put them up on the website or on the YouTube site. You can just simply watch them at 9 if you like it is right now. You can watch them at 8. You can watch them after, however you see fit and what can support your schedules. But I have been asked to start a new class beginning next week with the reassembly, the physical reassembly. So this will be the last one of the parables. I want to thank Tim and Jimmy, especially for their help, and Rodney for most of the recording. So we will finish the parables tonight, or this morning, I guess. This is the last of the handouts. I hope you were able to download it. I was sitting here and people talking to me and I wasn't listening. I actually started coloring on mine. I have most of mine colored in already. It is easier to color instead of color and speak, so I got that taken care of. I'll let you know one more thing about this class. I have made now, this is the 15th handout, because it's the 15th total class that I've done in this series. I am re-editing them for clarity and for misspellings and those sorts of things. They will all be uploaded as a single file when I give them to Pat, all 15 handouts going way back to January. If you would like a copy of the total final version, we can discuss that at some time. Hopefully I'll have it to Miss Pat by the end of the week and we'll start there. So next week's class is actually coordinated even more between the adult education and the elementary program. It will be 45 minutes long, like we're doing now. The focus will be on what I call the shadows. And if you know what a shadow is, it's referenced in the New Testament, but it's not heavy. It is a Old Testament event or a law, or a statement, or a vision, or a prophecy. It's an Old Testament account that Jesus fulfills in reality. And so they shadow what Jesus will do. There are a lot of them. Sometimes the thing in the Old Testament that's a shadow of Jesus is a thing, like a lamb. And sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's the opposite of a person or opposite of an event. It is a fascinating perspective to realize how Jesus is completely the subject, not only of the Gospels and of the rest of the New Testament, but of the Old Testament as well. Stories that you know, stories that you may be very familiar with, are now going to be shown to be prophecy of Jesus. And that is interesting. So the elementary program will take the first 15 minutes. I don't know what they're going to do. The only thing we've coordinated is the shadow itself. So we will present the same thing. They will talk about the shadow from the Old Testament as the story itself. And then I will be presenting the adult side, explaining how that shadow and what Jesus did to make that shadow become reality. So we'll begin that next week. Looking forward to it. I will make handouts like this time, except I won't be adding a coloring page. Whatever the elementary program does, they will do, and I'm excited to see what they're going to do. So, today's parable is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so we will finish our series on that parable. When I think of parables that are known in culture, that the world knows, not just people who go to church, but the world knows. I think there are really two very big ones. You can almost say to anyone, and they will have some inkling of what it means. One of them is the prodigal son, but the one I think is the most well-known is this one, the Good Samaritan. Even people who are not Bible knowledge believers, church literate, or anything of that nature, still have heard the expression, the Good Samaritan, and knows what that Samaritan person's actions mean. So we're going to talk about that one today. I have Tim and Jimmy with their very last one, or at least as part of this series, they're ready to go. And so we will turn it over to them, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes.
Good morning, boys and girls. We are so glad that you're here today, and we are excited that next week we will see a lot of you here at Central, and I hope you will come and say hello to your Bible teachers because they have been missing you. I know we've been missing our 5th graders, so hope to see you next week. Now today we have a very special visitor. He's been here before. He is known all over the scientific community as being very, very smart. And he has studied in so many universities, from North Dakota to Florida to Texas to Kentucky and even in Alabama. So let's welcome Dr. Les Luke Closer. Luke, are you okay? Are you all right?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Miss Jimmy. Just doing fine. Thank you.
Oh, you are just having so much trouble.
Just a slight miscalculation. My assistant, you may know her, Megan, Miss Mess and I were working on an experiment, and it just blew up. Oh. Now, these things happen when you are a scientist.
Oh, I know, and I'm glad you're okay. But, the last few weeks, all the kids here have been pretty much staying at home. We haven't been able to get out, so we've been playing more games and learning new skills and all. So tell us, what have you been doing?
Well, actually, I've been reading my Bible. When it gets a little bit boring, or if I get a little feeling sad or lonely, or it's one of those days when the lab blows up, I just open my Bible and I really get fired up.
I can see that. Reading your Bible will fire you up. So tell us, what experiments have you been working on this week before your lab blew up?
Well, actually, I was reading from Luke chapter 10, verse 27. Now, Miss Jimmy, do you know what that says?
Well, I do. In fact, our elementary kids know what it says too, because that verse is the verse that the elementary has chosen as their theme verse. In fact, Dr. Les Luke, if you go into our classrooms, every classroom has that verse in big letters on the wall. It says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, your strength, and mind, and also love your neighbor as yourself."
Right. Love is very important. To love each other.
Yes, it is easy to love our moms, our dads, our brothers and sisters, our Bible class teachers, and people that are kind to us. But there are some people that are hard to love. Some people are kind of mean to us. It's hard to love them. Sometimes people look a little bit different than we do and act differently and speak differently. Sometimes it's kind of hard to love those people.
You're right, Miss Jimmy. But when I started thinking, how do I love these people? Then I saw my assistant, Megan MS, cooking our lunch, and I got an idea. You know that she's really a chef, not a scientist.
I know that.
So I borrowed part of her lunch, And here, let me show you. Here, Miss Jimmy, take this potato.
Okay, got the potato.
Now here's a straw.
Yeah.
Make that straw go through the potato.
Well, I don't think I can. I'm trying, but I just can't. Here, Dr. Les Luke.
Of course
Show me how
not.
to do it.
Of course not. But you know, when you obey the part in Luke chapter 10 about loving God, it's easy to love others.
Oh, wow. You know, I hadn't thought of it that way. You love God, God is in you, His love, and that helps you love other people. Sometimes those people aren't as lovable, but you can love them because God's love is in you. Oh, Dr. Les Luke, thank you for sharing that with us. But now I have another question. Can I have your potato? I'm supposed to make Mr. Tim's lunch, and he loves potatoes, and I don't have any, so I would really like to have that potato.
Miss Jimmy, my pleasure.
Oh, thank you so
Just
much.
to help you out with your lunch.
Okay.
Now, I would suggest my assistant, Megan, to help, but she's a little messy when she cooks.
Well, that's all right. I think I can handle cooking the potato okay. But you know, your experiment reminds me of the parable this week. It's the story of some men on a journey, and two of the men, they didn't show God's love. But one man did show God's love. In fact, I bet you know this parable. It's called the Good Samaritan.
Yes, I happen to know that very well. In fact, do you know it's in Luke chapter 10?
Yes, it is. And in fact, we're going to read it. Can you stay and help us read it?
Well, thank you, Miss Jimmy, but I need to hurry. I think Megan, a mess, may be making some more lunch for me, and I need to get back before the lab explodes again. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. I think you better hurry, Dr. Les Luke. It sounds like she has made your lunch, and you may have to pick it up off the floor. So, boys and girls, get your Bibles, and let's turn to the New Testament, and we're going to turn to the book of Luke. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and we are going to find chapter 10. Remember, that's the dark numbers 10. And whenever you find that, then we're going to look for the little number 25. That's our verse, chapter 10, verse 25. Oh, Mr. Tim, I'm so glad you're here, and Dr. Les Luke saved us. We have our lunch.
Really good. All right, let's begin reading, starting at verse 25. Then a teacher of the law stood up. He was trying to test Jesus. He said, "Teacher, what must I do to get life forever?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And the man answered, "Love the Lord your God, love him with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. Also, you must love your neighbor as you love yourself." And Jesus said to him, "Your answer is right. Do this and you will have life forever." But the man wanted to show that the way he was living was right. So he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?"
To answer this question, Jesus said, "A man was going down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Some robbers attacked him. They tore off his clothes and beat him. They left him lying there, almost dead. It happened that a Jewish priest was going down the road. When the priest saw the man, he walked by on the other side of the road. Next, a Levi came there. He went over and looked at the man. Then he walked by on the other side of the road. Then a Samaritan, traveling down the road, came to where the hurt man was lying. He saw the man and felt very sorry for him. The Samaritan went to him and poured olive oil and wine on his wounds and bandaged them. He put the hurt man on his own donkey and took him to an inn. At the inn, the Samaritan took care of him. The next day, the Samaritan brought out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. The Samaritan said, "Take care of this man. If you spend more money on him, I will pay it back to you when I come again."
Then Jesus said, "Which one of these 3 men do you think was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the robbers?" The teacher of the law answered, "The one who helped him." Jesus said to him, "Then go and do the same thing he did."
Thank you, boys and girls, for reading along with us. And now let's look closer with Mr. Robert.
And you got a little bit out of that. So let's talk about this parable. This parable is found only in the Gospel of Luke. It is part of a walk that Jesus is making from Galilee to Jerusalem. And we've talked about that a little bit. So at this point, let me tell you the story, just repeat the story. There's a road from Jericho, which is near the Jordan River, and Jerusalem, which is up high. Jerusalem is a very high elevated city. It's up on a hill, up on a mountaintop. And so you'll see when it says he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, it means he's going down in elevation, not down south. So there's this road from Jerusalem to Jericho. A man is walking down. This man is not identified in any way. We don't know anything about him except he's male and he was on this road. He is waylaid, he's robbed, he's attacked by people laying on the side of the road, hidden on the side of the road most likely to attack travelers. And so that was the nature of the day. And so they attacked this man. They beat him, took his clothing, presumably took everything else he had, and left him for dead on the road or on the side of the road. Okay. Another man walks by. And so he walks by, and this man is a priest. So in the Jewish world, a priest has a special relationship between the Jewish people and God. The priest is a man who is identified to offer sacrifices on the behalf of the Jewish people. So he has very much responsibilities. He has obligations in the city of Jerusalem. They usually rotate. They'll go to the temple in Jerusalem. They will serve a period of time in which they offer sacrifices. In this day, though most people don't realize it, but sacrifices were offered every day. Every day there were sacrifices made. Some on behalf of individuals who have sinned. They brought themselves to the temple. They brought a sacrifice to the temple. But no human could enter, no person besides a priest could offer this sacrifice as a way to gain their forgiveness of their sins. So a priest is very important. He is knowledgeable of the law. He is supposed to teach the law to the people. And this man should have known what to do. He may have been under obligations. We don't know. He may have been hurrying, trying to meet some obligation. We do not know. But whatever this reason, he saw the man and passed by on the other side. I don't know why he changed lanes, so to speak, and passed on the other side. He may have been concerned that there were more robbers waiting near that injured man, or maybe he just didn't want to see it or want to ignore it. Doesn't say. But that's what happened. The second man who walks by is a Levite. And so once again, in case you're not familiar with all the odd Old Testament language and terms, let me just take a second to try to explain what a Levite is. So a Levite and a priest are from the same large tribe, but they have different roles. A Levite serves also in the temple, but he does not offer the sacrifices. He will help the priest perform their duties. They're the singers. We hear that there are singers in the temple. They serve as the guards of the temple. They serve in a lot of capacities in the temple, but they do not offer the sacrifices. So what you have here is a lot of religious people with very much responsibilities in their temple. And the Levite does the same thing as the priest. The Levite sees the injured man on the road. I don't know if they think he's dead or alive. It does not say. What we do know is they did not check. And so he likewise saw the man, and then he passed also on the opposite side of the road. So you think about this. This is not an unrealistic expectation, is it? Think about the times you've passed people who may have been in some obvious sort of need, but there are certain dangers. A lot of us will not pick up a hitchhiker because of that. There's a hitchhiker in need? Well, apparently there's some need, but is that hitchhiker also a risk? Right, and so we think that way. So before we become too condemning of both the priest and the Levite, we have to remember that sometimes we are really not much better. But at least we understand what they were thinking. And then a third man walks by the injured man on the road. And this man is a Samaritan man. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means too, because it meant something in the parable. Jesus has a reason for picking a Samaritan. And he's going to make a point about that in their context. But unless you understand the nature of the times and the nature of the people, this parable loses some of its punch. So our goal today is to try to help you understand what that meaning is. So you can gain a lot of understanding from the parable just from what you know, but the Samaritan part adds another very important dimension that we will talk about. So this Samaritan man sees the man. He goes to him, realizes he's alive, and then begins to try to bind up his wounds and help him. He then puts him on his donkey, which he apparently has with him. He carries him to an inn being like a hotel. These are places on the sides of major roads where people can stop, spend the evening, be fed, and all those sorts of things. He takes him to an inn. He takes out money, gives it to the innkeeper, and asks the innkeeper to take care of this man because he has to go away. Perhaps he's in a hurry too. This man, the Samaritan, may have other business that he cannot fail to attend, but he puts him in a position where the injured man is in a good place, and he pays for his care to the innkeeper. And then he tells the innkeeper one more thing, that he's going to be back, and if he incurs any other expenses beyond what he gave the innkeeper, he will pay for it out of his own. And so that's the parable. And that's the end of that parable. And it ends with a question. So let's go back and talk about what is going on at the very moment that Jesus is presenting this parable. So like I said, in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, it states a passage to me as a very big marker. It is for me, and that is Jesus' decision to leave Galilee in the north and head south and up in elevation to Jerusalem. And he's going there because the Passover is coming, and he is intending to be the Passover lamb. He knows he's going to his crucifixion. And so for the next few chapters of Luke, Luke describes this walk from Galilee to Jerusalem. And this is chapter 10. And I told you that the decision to march was 9:51. And Luke is chronologically rather reliable. So what we have is a very early event on the march from Galilee to Jerusalem. On this way, he's going through a town. Jesus is going through a town with his following, which includes certainly the 12 disciples, but probably is starting to pick up more and more people along the way. He goes through a town, And he comes to a man who is defined as an expert in the law. So what that means is, whether he is a Levite or a priest, maybe not. They certainly would be experts in the law. But this is some other teacher, somebody who studied and knows what the law of Moses says extremely well. And he's an expert. He's a teacher, and possibly a rabbi. We don't really know, only that he is knowledgeable. So he comes to this town, and this in verse 25, he stood up to test Jesus. Now this is interesting. He's decided to challenge Jesus on his knowledge of the law. Because in this time, and this should not seem unfamiliar, our time does it as well. We try to check people's knowledge to make sure they are worthy. And so he has addressed, the expert has asked Jesus, because he's not really interested in the answer as much as he's interested in checking Jesus. He asked him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Well, that's a question worthy of being asked, isn't it? But his goal is not to know the answer. His goal is to see if Jesus knows the answer. And then Jesus responds in a very interesting way. He says, "You know the law." In essence, this is Jesus talking in northern Alabama. "You know the law. Tell me what you think it says." And so he responded, and this is interesting. I like this answer. He answered in verse 27, the expert, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." We've seen this before, haven't we? Jesus was asked, "What is the greatest commandment?" And then he gave this answer. Jesus gave this answer, and he gave the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbor. So that's impressive. The expert law either had heard Jesus say that earlier, or he knew it, we don't know, but he has given a true godly answer to what does the law say. And he got the answer right. Unsatisfied, now Jesus still hasn't answered this, right? Unsatisfied with the response because it didn't really glorify the expert. In verse 20, but he wanted to justify himself. That is the lawyer, the expert in the law. And who is my neighbor? Well, that is an interesting question, isn't it? And so, yes, we can certainly agree that love your neighbor is good. We all talk about loving each other. You see, culturally, we're talking about loving each other. But this is the important question. Who is my neighbor? And so Jesus responded with the parable that Tim and Jimmy just read and the one I just recited to you. And then at the end of that parable, Jesus comes back to the man, the lawyer, and he says, of these three men, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan, who acted like a neighbor? And it's fascinating. I think the answer is fascinating because the lawyer will not say Samaritan. And he says in verse 37, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said, go and do that. And that's the end of this parable. I don't know if the lawyer was unsatisfied with this answer, did not like what the answer implied, but he would not call out the Samaritan as the man. But he identified him through his actions that yes, the Samaritan was the one. He just would not say Samaritan. That's intriguing. Unfortunately, it's hard for me to be critical when I think at times in my life I've behaved the same way. And I'd be willing to bet that all of us in some degree have behaved that way. So let me tell you why Samaritan is challenging. And I don't want to get into a history lesson. Actually, I do. I enjoy it. I don't want to get too heavy of one for this class. But if you'll bear with me, I'll give you an explanation. So Samaria is a region of what we call in the New Testament is Judea, which would include the area of Galilee, the area of Samaria, and what we would now call the Judean province that surrounds the city of Jerusalem. Judea Roman province is in the south. Samaria is just north of Judea, and just north of Samaria is Galilee. I think modern day West Bank would be the area that would incorporate New Testament Samaria. In the Old Testament, Samaria was the tribe of Ephraim. And so what you'll know is that for some reason, and we'll explain a little bit this, the Samaritans and the Jews had a disdain for each other. They did not like each other. And then typically, the Jews thought themselves superior to the Samaritans. They were the more politically powerful. They were the more advanced in their study, in their technical sophistication, and things of that nature. And they perceived themselves as superior to the Samaritans. So why? So I want you to understand this. The Samaritans are children of Israel. They are not another race. They are Hebrew. In the Old Testament, the word Jew does not appear till the very end of the Old Testament times. It's a name that they were associated from the tribe of Judah. And so Jew is a shortening of the name of somebody from Judah. So they became the Jews. Ephraim would have been a different tribe, and they would have been Ephraimites. But after Israel in the north and Judah in the south sinned, both were taken captive by other nations. And in the north, in Israel, which includes Ephraim, they were scattered across the world when the Assyrian army captured them. They left some, and they scattered a lot of the others. In the south, with Babylon attacking Judah, they were taken in groups, as a whole group together, those that lived, and to Babylon, and so they stayed together. And then they returned. They were known by that point on as Jews, as opposed to Israelites. So the people of Ephraim stayed to some part. Some ways they mixed with other peoples that moved in, but they were all part of Jacob's descendants. So they are children of Israel. So they're very much like the Jewish people. So they're not a different race, but they are a different ethnicity. And this, sometimes the closer you are to each other, the more hostile the behavior to each other. So they're Hebrews, and they're brothers. And the chapter in the Bible that has us the most information about Samaritans is the story in John 4 of Jesus with a woman at the well. And in this discussion, John chapter 4, you'll see a lot of her claims that Jesus does not challenge. She does not challenge. She says, our father Jacob, in chapter 4, verse 12, are you greater, this is she asking Jesus, are you greater than our father Jacob? That means she's from Israel. Jesus does not challenge the assertion that she's a descendant of Jacob. Therefore, she's an Israelite, just like Jesus. Okay? And then she declares the political image, the political religious conflict of the day. Whose site to worship? Do you worship God in Jerusalem, or do you worship God in a mountain in Samaria? And it depends on who you ask. And the Jews would say Jerusalem, and the Samaritans would say it's Mount Gerizim. It's not mentioned in John 4, but that is the mountain, Mount Gerizim in Samaria. So God clearly wanted people to worship in Jerusalem, didn't he? But if you read the old law, that was never stated. It is King David that wanted to worship in Jerusalem and build a temple there that God never asked for. But God permitted King David, to build that temple. So there is no law of Moses order, directive, or commandment to worship in Jerusalem. And so they have no better claim, according to the law of Jerusalem, than they do the Samaritans at Mount Gerizim. And the woman at the well states that. You Jews say, right, that you worship in Jerusalem. We say we worship on this mountain. Who's right? And so Jesus did not get into that argument with her. Says there is coming a time where neither Jerusalem or this mountain, but we will worship in spirit and in truth. So your location does not matter. What you should understand from this parable is the reason that Jesus chose a Samaritan man to heal the injured man is because the Jews despised them. They despised the Samaritans. And you'll see him reference Samaritans in 2 or 3 other places in his parables and stories. And that is the reason they did not like him. He put to the Jewish expert a man that the Jewish expert would look down on. And what Jesus is saying is his race and his people and his culture are not important. Are not important. But you have made them important, and you've made them important foolishly. So that's a strong, strong assault on the lawyer that Jesus just gave. And it's not clear in this parable if you read it unless you understand the stress between the Jews and the Samaritans. They are brothers. They are related. They're all descended from Jacob. And yet, the stress is high. This is a tough parable. I think this is a tough parable because I think I am guilty of committing the very bad thing that Jesus is accusing this lawyer of. We've all done it. Whether we've looked the other way when someone on the side of the road, we've looked the other way when someone needs help. We're all guilty of it. What is interesting, I think you should notice in this parable, is that the man on the ground, the beaten man, is never identified by any other attribute. He is not described. We don't know if he's Jewish. We don't know if he's a Samaritan. We don't know if he's Greek or Gentile, another level of stress between the Jews and the Gentiles. We don't know. We don't know if he was wealthy or poor. Only thing we know is that he's male, he's a man, and he was on that road. And he needed help. That's all we know. So this Samaritan, I don't know if he was approaching someone he would despise or not. This Samaritan only saw the need, and he acted because of the need. And I think if it were important to know who this man on the ground was, we would be told. But the fact that we're not told is the important part. It does not matter who they are. The godly man is the one who responds, not the one who's in need. And so the Samaritan responded as a neighbor. So the message is, this is all in the question, who is my neighbor? It's not the one who is in need. The neighborly person who's the one who looks on need and acts, not is aware of a need, not is conscious of a need, but acts on the need. And so we didn't cover it in the online, but the very first parable we taught in this series was a very well-known one. It has a nice little song. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The foolish man builds his house upon the sand. And that parable begins with the statement. Jesus has just spoken at the Sermon on the Mount, and he ends that with, those who hear my words and do them, okay, are like men who build their house on the rock. It will stand when God returns. And those who do not do them, their house will fall, and they will suffer eternal consequences. So it's a fun song to sing, right? But it has a very, very intense message. The It's about what you do. It's not about what you know. It's not what you can understand. It's not what you say. The one who is a neighbor is the one who acts and behaves like a neighbor. And we are given no conditions on who that person we aid are. Jesus has given us no wiggle room on who to love. Have you ever thought about that? We cannot love one and justify disdain for another. Not anyone. We love the man on the ground. We love the police officer with his knee in his back. We love the store owner who's been looted, and we love the man who throws the rock and loots them. We love them all. We have to. We cannot choose one over the other. And when we do, we have chosen sides. And when we do, we have made division. That is the world's method. The world loves division. It thrives on division. It gives those who push division power and money. It gives them glory in this world. We are not them. We don't get to choose. We don't want to choose because we're not competent enough to choose. Only God can sort it out. We have been given one instruction: to look no further than the need and to act. That's all. We don't get to pick sides. I am stressed by the picking of sides, whether it be on any issue: politics, race, religion, morality. The world needs division because it seeks its power from it. We don't want division. Are you surprised that the world acts this way? I mean, that's, I think, the other part. Why is all this stuff frustrating? Because we believe the world should act differently. Jesus told us they would not act differently. They will act in their own self-interest. We have been called to a better thing. When we trust Jesus, the only message I have to the lost world is come to Jesus. There is no other message. To those who've accepted Jesus, we then have a fuller message about what that behavior acts like. But we have all been called out. We cannot use the world's techniques. We love them all. We have to love them all. And this parable drives that point home. Who is my neighbor? They're all my neighbor. I am honored for the opportunity to show them all love. So, I've come close to the end of my appointed time, as they say. I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you next week. I've learned that I will not be able to be here. I will be out of town. I regret that for the sake of not being able to see some of you, but I am joyful for the opportunity of what I get to go do. You have a great week and a great rest of the morning. Remember, just a little technical part, I did get mine colored. If you want to send them in to Miss Pat, she would love it. If you would like a copy of the whole series, after I get it all cleaned back up, you're welcome to send her a note. She'll send me a note. When I get them sent to her, she will send them to you. You have to bring down this YouTube session to get back on. At 10 o'clock, there will be singing, recorded singing. And at 10:15, we will begin the live stream our assembly. We are assembled today. We're not starting to assemble next week. We're assembled today because our assembly is not physical. It's not based on this building. As pretty as it is and as empty as it is, it's not based on this building. It's based on our common love. And I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.